So I'll just start off. So I'm McGrath. I am a senior at UConn. I was given this opportunity through WHUS radio station, and I'm joined by ESPN senior writer Seth Wickersham and author of a New York bestseller, or New York Times bestseller, excuse me, being his new released book, It's Better to Be Feared, The New England Patriots Dynasty and the Pursuit of Greatness. The book reveals the inner workings of the controversial and secretive franchise that dominated the NFL from 2001 to 2019, illuminating the power dynamics between owner Robert Kraft, head coach Bill Belichick, and quarterback Tom Brady. Seth, I just want to thank you for joining me today and taking the time to do this interview.
My pleasure, man.
So, before we get into the heart of the book and discussion, I just had a couple preliminary questions just about, your desire to write the book. So just to start, I know you reported on the Patriots for quite some time on your own, but how long did it take you to piece this book together altogether?
Well, I had to do it in a year because I got the contract to do the book. The publisher came to me about doing it, and the contract was signed in like late 2019, early 2020, and the contract had a stipulation in it that if Bill Belichick retired, or if Tom Brady retired or left the team, that the book was due a year after that date. And so when I first signed it, I was thinking, okay, even though there's a chance that Tom Brady leaves, I think that I've got plenty of time to do this, whatever. And then within a week, the world shut down due to COVID, and Tom Brady left the Patriots, and the clock started running. And so it was kind of a anxiety producing and very lonely feeling. But, as you said, I had reported on the Patriots for a long time. So I was hired at ESPN magazine shortly after I graduated from college at the University of Missouri. And one of my very first assignments actually was to go up to Foxborough in November of 2001 and write about the guy who seemed to be filling in admirably for Drew Bledsoe, who was injured, and that was Tom Brady. And I remember, I met with him at the old Foxborough Stadium, which was like a high school field, and he was wearing a gray sweatsuit, and he had a backpack on. He looked like a college student, and his backpack was full of beer because he had lost a Michigan State bet. And, I remember at that meeting, he said, football's always come really easy to me. And at the time, I was about the same age that he was. I was like, who says that? This 6th round pick, whatever. And then you realize like years later that there's a lot of moments like that are really revealing in retrospect. And I realized that, between meetings like that and, writing about Tom Brady periodically over his years, and being at his Super Bowl party, and being at his house, and, having, late night calls with Belichick that sometimes lasted an hour or more. I felt like that, and doing investigative stories on the Patriots, like things they didn't like that much. I felt like I was just sitting on like a mound of information that I could draw upon to try to write a book. And then, the key for me was, using the contacts both inside and outside of the building that I had accumulated over the past 20 years of covering the NFL to try to fill in other moments that I didn't witness firsthand or that I wanted to know more about. So that's kind of how it came together.
Very cool. Yeah, it seems like, obviously the book is definitely a hit so far. I've looked at, a couple of your other interviews and other reviews. I haven't had a chance yet to read the book, but I definitely am interested in purchasing it. But just in a rough estimate, how many people would you say, over the time span that you were reporting on the Patriots and then, accumulating all this information to ultimately make this book, how many people would you say took this book to happen, like contributing wise, excuse me?
It was hundreds over the course. It was over 100 exclusively for the book, but it was hundreds over the course of it. And one of the things that I realized also was, just because my career arc is kind of mirrored the Patriots, dynastic run, a lot of times when I was writing about other people, I was actually kind of writing about the Patriots. Like anytime I was writing about Peyton Manning, especially, before 2006, when they were kind of able to get over the hump, I was really writing about the Patriots. And like, there was once I went out and spent a couple of days with Dwight Freeney, who, was an all-pro defensive end for the Colts and, borderline Hall of Fame player. And, he was trying all these drastic measures in the offseason to get better. And I was like, he's doing that because they've been able to accomplish everything so far in the NFL except get past the Patriots. And so I realized that, like, I was consciously and unconsciously writing about these guys for such a long time that even like when I was writing about people that weren't on the team, I was basically writing about the Patriots because, they were just so dominant that everybody else's greatness had to be viewed within the context of, New England's immortality. I mean, I did a story in 2017 about the Seattle Seahawks and how Richard Sherman had wanted a trade and how there was all these problems in the building between Sherman and Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll. And really, that was a story about what happened after Malcolm Butler's interception at the goal line. And so, like I said, the Patriots were just so special that like they ended up just affecting everything around them. And so even when I wasn't interviewing members of the team or coaches on the team, and I was interviewing other people, I was kind of writing about the Patriots regardless.
Yeah, very cool. It seems like, I mean, the Patriots in general have definitely, written their own story, obviously, as, you've written a full book about it, but they've definitely impacted a lot of other teams and personal stories as well. So would you say that was kind of a motivation for you to write such an intriguing story?
Well, I just wanted to do the best I could with it. I mean, that was my motivation. But, all this stuff helped a lot, and so, that's how I would characterize that.
Okay, awesome. And then now to get into like the more intriguing parts about your writing and about the NFL and the Patriots themselves. As we know, Belichick is probably the best coach in modern football era. While Tom Brady is likewise at the quarterback position. In your opinion, what made the two work so well together?
Well, they came into each other's lives at a very critical time, and that was in 2000. And even though they didn't know it at the time, but Belichick had seen his professional life completely annihilated by what happened in Cleveland, and he had to wait 5 years to get another chance to be a head coach. And those were 5 hard years. Parcells was pretty tough on him. Their relationship kind of fell apart during those New York Jets years. And so, he understood that this was his last best chance to be a head coach and especially to be a great coach. And then you had Brady, who nearly went undrafted, right? And despite all the hard work he had at Michigan, almost lost the starting job there in some ways. And so both of these guys understood the fragility of their profession, but they were also really interesting in that, like, they were both quiet about it, but they were supremely motivated in ways that even having written a book about them, I still don't know if I completely appreciate the extent to which they define themselves by their performance on the football field. And so when they came into each other's lives, and especially when Brady took over for Belichick or for Drew Bledsoe and started playing well, it was like they needed each other in a way that they both kind of inherently understood, even if they got on each other's nerves at times. And that's really what carried them, I think, through especially the first 3 Super Bowls, the first part of that run. The fact that, like, these two guys realized how special it was what they were doing. And even if, like, Tom Brady was angry with Bill Belichick after he cut Lawyer Malloy, and even if, Bill Belichick would privately kind of grouse about the Hollywood turn that Brady's life had taken, they realized that they needed each other to satisfy some deeply innate need to dominate on the football field. And I think that that's what really propelled them, especially in the early part of the dynasty.
Now, 20 years down the line, we can obviously look at this and analyze it in every single way possible. 6 Super Bowls passed now between the two, and now Brady with his 7th with the Bucs. If they had never joined together in 2000, how different do you think their paths would have been?
Oh, I mean, drastically different. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what. It's so drastically different. It's almost as like what would have happened if they hadn't been born. I mean, I just don't think that, like, I don't think that Bill Belichick would have had anywhere close to the success that he had. And I don't even know if Tom Brady would have lasted as long as he did. I mean, I think that obviously Brady was a special player, but if he had been drafted by an unstable franchise, the Arizona Cardinals or something, he might have had a good career, but he wouldn't have been looked at like the greatest ever. I mean, there's no way you can possibly say that. And, in terms of Belichick, I mean, remember before that 2001 season, they signed Drew Bledsoe to a 10-year contract, even though Belichick had severe reservations about Drew Bledsoe's, abilities as a football player, and Bledsoe didn't run that offense very well. And so I don't think that they would have had anywhere close to the amount of success that they'd had together if they had been independent. It's almost like trying to imagine something that you're trying to, it wouldn't have existed as it existed in any way.
Right. Yeah. It definitely is incredibly hard to tell because it's like, if nothing ever existed at all. But just staying on Belichick, I know that in I think the last week or maybe 2 weeks since you've come out with the book, he has come out and said that he does not remember talking to you. And I'm sure you've been asked this question many times before already. But what can you specifically say about that claim?
Well, he said he didn't think he'd ever spoken to me, and I'm not sure why he said that. I mean, the public record on that is very clear, and almost all the conversations we had over the years were exclusive, and I recorded them. And at one point, he really complimented my work, and so that was his statement, and that's kind of as I said, I'm not sure exactly why he said it.
Okay. Yeah. It does. It seems like, I mean, with all the details, it seems like it would be a hard, fallacy to say about. But just going into the power dynamic of the Patriots, specifically with Kraft and Bill Belichick, I feel like a lot of the inner workings had not been talked about before the last couple of years. But what can you say about the power dynamic between the two over the years?
Well, broadly speaking, there's no other way to discuss it other than to say it worked phenomenally well. You look at other dynasties like the Kobe and Shaq Lakers that just weren't able to hang together as long because ego or whatever it was got in the way. And, the Patriots were fundamentally different. That doesn't mean that there weren't problems. And, I think that along the way, Robert Kraft really helped manage that relationship. It doesn't mean that it wasn't without, headaches along, you're dealing with incredibly stubborn type A personalities. And at one point in 2018, I reported in the book about this moment where Kraft is at a kind of a business conference in Aspen, one of these good rich guy conferences. And he says, I really hate to leave an event like this. You're at this event, you're with some of the smartest minds, and I got to go to Detroit to be with the biggest effing a-hole in my life, my head coach. But the bottom line is that, he managed these personalities in a pretty good way. And I think that he understood what he had. He had watched, obviously, the Dallas Cowboys fall apart because of ego. And I think that he understood what he had. And so he did what he could to try to appease these personalities until, finally he sided with Bill Belichick. And, in August of 2019, there had been problems in the building for a couple years at this point. I mean, you had all the problems of 2017 when, Belichick banned Alex Guerrero from part of the building and, held on to Jimmy Garoppolo till the last minute because he really was invested in him as a player. And, Tom Brady wanted a contract until he was age 45. And the Patriots just wanted to continue viewing him as a year-to-year player because he was trying to do something that was unprecedented. And they didn't know how long it was going to last. And so in August of 2019, he ends up kind of siding with Belichick. They're in the middle of a contract negotiation. Tom Brady gets so frustrated that he considers leaving training camp because, in protest. And then he ends up signing a 1-year deal with an out to be a free agent at the end of the year. And he and Gisele Bundchen put their house on the market 48 hours after he signed that contract.
Yeah, I do remember that. I remember that was publicly known information, correct, at the time?
Did he put his house on the market?
Yes. Yeah. So I do remember that happening, and that kind of stirred a lot of A lot of questions into whether he was actually going to leave and whether this was going to be it, because correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the first, after that last year contract, that was the first time he was an unrestricted free agent in his career, correct?
Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. And then kind of diverging into the Pats, obviously we know that they have 6 Super Bowl rings, 2001, 2003, back-to-back in 2003 and 2004, 2014, 2016, and 2018. We look at that greatness and we see it as, the highest power in the NFL, right next to the Steelers with 6 as well. With all the recent rings in the early 2000s, people remember those 3, but now with the modern football era in the 2010s and now into the 2020s, with all the recent rings from 2014 to 2018, people forget that there was that 10-year gap in between championships. Can you tell me what that time was like with the Patriots?
That was actually the part of the book that I really enjoyed writing the most, because, they had plateaued at an incredibly high level, losing Super Bowls to your New York Giants, by inches, really, in the final minutes of the game. And yet they had plateaued nonetheless, and they had to figure out a way to become a little bit better to get them over the edge. You think about that Super Bowl, the second Super Bowl loss to the Giants, where Brady had Wes Welker wide open down the seam, and that would have iced the game, and he missed him. And even though Welker probably could have caught the ball, it was a bad throw. And no, it wasn't a bad throw. It was just off. And how Tom Brady tries to make that 2 inches closer to make it an easier catch for Wes Welker. That to me was the most interesting part of it, because Brady and Belichick reevaluated their belief systems in ways that I think was kind of brave. And I think that also, they don't quite get enough credit for just how impressive that is. And you think about who Tom Brady is now and his evangelical adherence to the TB12 method. I mean, that stuff was all started then. That was him trying to control something that was inherently uncontrollable. And, Bill Belichick, realizing that, after all of the hours and everything that he was doing, getting his team ready to play, that it wasn't quite enough. And that in the 2014 season, he needed to find a way to make sure that if they got in the playoffs and they were behind again, and it looks like they were going to lose again, like they were against the Baltimore Ravens, he had some sort of mechanism to ignite some momentum and get them back in the game. And that ended up being those famous Baltimore and Raven formations that really reignited the dynasty. And in the middle of it all, you had Spygate, which was, an incredible black mark on the franchise. You had the beginnings of Deflategate, even though it really came to fruition after they had beaten the Seahawks in the Super Bowl, it started before. And so that entire era I just found fascinating, because they were in a professional and cultural thin air, but they had plateaued nonetheless.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people, as I said, do forget about that. And then going into my fandom, as a Giants fan, I want to ask you, had they won in 2007 to complete that perfect season, instead of going 18-1, going 19-0, and then obviously in 2011 again, how different do you think things would have been at the time? Since, each major loss, clearly, especially in a Super Bowl, is a great learning experience, and probably made Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and the Patriots even better when they were moving forward. But hypothetically, Brady would have been 5 for 5 in Super Bowls going into 2012. Would he still be chasing that same greatness today, or how do you think things would be different?
Oh, I mean, I think that it would be the exact same thing. I mean, obviously, look, they won Super Bowls by close margins and they lost them by close margins. And so, that's kind of what just makes their dominance so interesting. But one of the reasons why I didn't write the book bracketed around their Super Bowl wins was because the fact that look at these guys, they're still going. It's like Super Bowls almost are like a byproduct of a deeper compulsion that, as I said earlier, even though I did my best to understand it, maybe we all just can't appreciate, how strong that urge is to continue playing football and to continue coaching it. It's really something. I mean, you look at Tom Brady, he won the Super Bowl last year, with the Bucks, and moments after the game, his family comes on to give him a hug. And the very first thing his wife says to him is, what more do you have to prove? And he figures out a way to change the subject, because he's like, I don't want to answer that right now, because, they coach and they play for very mysterious reasons. It's almost like, the Rolling Stones or Bruce Springsteen continuing to tour and put out albums now, because they need to do something that's so fundamental and essential to their being that life without it would just make them so supremely miserable that they really don't want to think about it.
Yeah, it is definitely hard to explain unless you're in that position, or, obviously have the talent to put yourself in that position, but there's definitely a lot of drive that goes with it. Just to pick your brain a little bit about today's NFL, do you believe we're seeing any of these formulaic dynasties elsewhere, or is it too perfect of a situation to emulate for so long?
It's too perfect. There's no question. Look at Kansas City.
I was about to say Kansas City. Yep.
Yeah, they looked for a moment like they might have that type of team. And you think about how thin the margins are in the NFL. If Dee Ford doesn't line up offsides in the 2018 AFC Championship game, the Chiefs win that. Who knows if they win the Super Bowl against the Rams? Let's just say they do. Then they win again the next year. Then they go and play the Bucs the year after that. They'd already won 2 in a row, going for 3 in a row. But instead, Dee Ford lines up offsides. They waste a year with, Patrick Mahomes in his prime. They win the next year, obviously. And then they go the next year, they lose to the Bucs decisively. And now it looks like their window is closed. That's how thin the margins are in the NFL. And that's how quickly, windows open and close. It's just astounding. And it puts what they were able to do in even a more rarefied air.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's definitely hard to, emulate that success, especially since it's a 53-man roster. There are so many coaches on the team, a lot of staff, and it's more than 53 guys too, because you have injuries. You could run through, over 100 guys in a season. And so you mentioned obviously the Super Bowl of the Chiefs with the 49ers. Kind of talking about the 49ers, I just want your take on the Jimmy Garoppolo situation for the second rounder. Can you just walk me through that whole situation?
Well, Belichick was deeply invested in Jimmy. I think that one of the things with Belichick is that he's always had a lot of pride. And whenever he turned over the roster to his successor, he wanted it to be a good team and set up at quarterback. And so he was very invested in Garoppolo. And at one point during the 2016 season, he used the word seamless to describe the difference between Jimmy running the offense and Brady running the offense. That's an astounding word to use right there. And so they beat the Falcons in the Super Bowl after the 2016 season. Brady wants a contract until he's age 45. And the Patriots don't want to give it to him. And then you have all these teams calling about the availability of Garoppolo. They figure that Brady, who just helped rally the team from a 20-3 deficit in the Super Bowl, they'd fix him up long term. They had accomplished something. So they're calling to see if Jimmy's available. And Belichick says no. And he tells the coaches, we're not trading Jimmy. And then as the trade deadline is getting closer, you've got all these forces at work. The fact that Kraft had aligned himself with Brady and publicly said that Brady had earned the right to leave the team when he wants, which is an owner's way of making a decision. You have the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo and Tom Brady shared an agent, and Jimmy was refusing contract extensions from the Patriots. And then you have the fact that Belichick was running out of options, even though he wanted to hang on to Jimmy as long as he could. Now, I reported at the time, and other people did too, that Kraft made it clear to Belichick that Brady was their quarterback of the future and that he'd have to trade Jimmy. Kraft denied those at the time. But Belichick hangs on to Jimmy until the very last second. And then the day before the trading deadline, doesn't even create a trade market for Jimmy. Calls up, he texts Kyle Shanahan, who was the coach of the Niners. Obviously, Belichick goes way back with the Shanahan family. And when Shanahan gets the text, he thought that it was Belichick offering a pick-me-up because they had just gotten killed the day before. And instead, Belichick is like, do you want Jimmy for a second rounder? The 49ers talk it over. They say yes. And so that's how the trade happened. And it's just interesting that Jimmy Garoppolo, you look at him, he's kind of an interesting guy in the entire, dynasty, because obviously he was a point, a pawn in a greater game during his days in New England. Then he goes to San Francisco, plays well there, has them up in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl before the defense kind of collapses. After that game, Brady's a free agent. He calls up the 49ers. He basically makes it known to the 49ers that, like, look, if you guys want me, I will sign with the team just like that. No free agency tour, no bidding war, nothing. I get to go back to the team that I loved growing up. My parents can drive to games for the first time since high school. And all you got to do is part ways with Jimmy. And you and I both know that, there's a difference between me and Jimmy. 49ers decide, they think about it. They watch all of Brady's snaps from the 2019 season. Then they decide that they got to stick with Jimmy. So they do. Then a year later, they decide they're ready to move on from Jimmy. They trade all this capital to move up to the third pick in the draft. Meanwhile, you have the Patriots who are looking for a quarterback too, and they were really interested in Jimmy. At one point talked about trading a second rounder to the Niners, basically calling it even from the trade in 2017. The 49ers wanted a first round pick for Jimmy. And so, but even so, even then the Patriots were like looking forward to maybe reuniting with Garoppolo. And so it's just, he's kind of a strange little vessel in this entire, dynastic run.
It's definitely interesting to see what his sort of role was, because he did come in around the Deflategate time when Brady was suspended for those 4 games and played very well within the system. And I don't know if that's kind of the time that you said that Belichick thought it was seamless. Is that the time you were referring to?
It was later that season. So Jimmy ended up playing. He didn't play the 4 games totally because he got hurt, but it was later in the season, and it was actually even more interesting because Belichick was asked a question about Brady's longevity, his astounding longevity, and he actually managed to turn it into an answer that complimented Garoppolo.
Okay, very interesting. I haven't seen that, but I'll definitely take a look into that. And then just to stay on, not specifically Brady going to the 49ers, but just Brady's free agency run altogether. I know on HBO's The Shop, he talked about a specific team that didn't want him altogether. Was that the team he was referring to, or was it something else? If you know about it,
I think it's either them or the Raiders, and I really think it's the 49ers. Like I don't know, and obviously, Brady sometimes says things and then he realizes he said something he doesn't want to explain. So he kind of like figures out a way to make it go away. But I think personally, with no inside information, I think that it was the 49ers.
Okay. Yeah.
He wanted to go there. He really did more than he wanted to go to the Las Vegas Raiders.
Okay. Yeah. Because I knew for the longest time that he was from California. I think he had been interested in playing for them even when he was in that full run with the Patriots, but obviously it wasn't in his best interest to do so. But it's just interesting to see in that aspect. Kind of talking about Tom's marketability real quick in terms of like social media. I just talked about HBO's The Shop that he was on. His social media accounts like Twitter and Instagram didn't start until 2017. I believe his TB12 campaign didn't really start until around that time either. And then Tom versus Time wasn't released until 2018. Did a lot of this, like his marketability and things that he could do off the football field, did that play any role into his frustration?
Well, I think that he won, they beat the Falcons in the Super Bowl. And I think that Tom, the dynamic in the building just changed. I mean, you're right. He did the TB12, he did the TB12 method. He released the book and he promoted it, into the season, which was rare. And, Belichick at one point was asked about the book. He was very dismissive. He said, I see Tom every day. I don't think I need to read a book. And of course, like, he went out of his way to make very clear that Alex Guerrero had no official role with the Patriots. And then you have, the Tom versus Time documentary, of which the Patriots had only nominal awareness. And so, and then as he got older, I think that, like, he wanted more of a say, and he wanted to be more than just an employee of the Patriots. And, at one point he told Joe Montana, he said, they ask my advice, speaking of the Patriots coaches, I give it, and then they do their own thing. And so things are just different in Tampa. At this point, Tom Brady knows about offensive football more than most head coaches in the NFL. And, he's the quarterback of the Bucs. He's the de facto offensive coordinator. He's a pseudo personnel executive. Alex Guerrero not only has an office in the Bucs building, but he got a Super Bowl ring. And I think that Brady is just treated in a way that he can do things that were, probably just unrealistic in New England, just because of the program that Belichick, the wildly successful program that Belichick had created.
Right. And I think we see that a little bit in Aaron Rodgers' situation. What's your take on that? And how, I know that Brady obviously has a lot more success in terms of Super Bowl wins and such, but equally, as good of quarterbacks. How could you compare both of their mindsets to that role in wanting to be more a part of the organization?
Well, it's similar and it's not. I mean, the issue with Brady was always, I think the biggest one was that he wanted a contract until he was age 45, whereas the Packers are, they're willing to pay Aaron Rodgers to stay there. It's just that he wants more of a role. And I think that, Brady never made a condition of, him signing with the Bucs. But I write about this in the book. When Bruce Arians was courting him, he did say, I've always given my quarterbacks a lot of leniency into what we do on offense. And by the way, you're Tom Brady. That's something that Belichick's just not going to say exactly, And so all that said, I think from a broader perspective is that I don't think it's healthy for quarterbacks to have a say in personnel or have like a bigger say in the building unless they are undisputably, these future Hall of Famers. I don't think it's a good idea for like receivers and running backs to have to worry about impressing the quarterback. Otherwise, they might not make the team. I don't think that that's a good locker room place to be. But that said, if you've got Tom Brady, if you've got Aaron Rodgers, these guys who are not only first ballot Hall of Famers, but, among the best ever, if not the best ever to do this, you're, as a coach and as a person, as a GM, your entire legacy is going to be defined by what you did when you had these, incredibly special players. And so in that regard, I think that it's, I think that you'd be a fool to not welcome their input, especially into like offensive decisions, because, like I said, this is different than, letting, I'm just making this name up, but, Ryan Tannehill or somebody like that into your draft meetings. I think that when you've got someone who's clearly one of the greatest ever do this, and they're at the end of their careers, it's in your best interest to do everything possible to, make that relationship work and have success on the field.
Yeah, I would most definitely agree. As a Giants fan, I'm pretty sure that Eli was in a lot of those specific conversations, maybe not all of them, but he was definitely highly regarded within the organization, which, made him stay for so long. And after the 2 Super Bowls, they did owe a lot to him. Just staying on the kind of decision-making based on a Hall of Fame quarterback and, his expertise. Diverging into a different area, I did want to pick your brain, if I could, about the Parcells versus the Belichick tree. Obviously, Belichick's from the coaching tree of Parcells, along with Tom Coughlin, Sean Payton, Romeo Crennel, and many others. A lot of successful head coaches in the NFL. Looking at Belichick's coaching tree of Matt Patricia, Mike Vrabel, Brian Flores, Joe Judge, and then obviously McDaniels, it's definitely obviously still young, very early to make any sort of determination on it. But what's your current assessment on his coaching tree?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I write an entire chapter about that in the book because, clearly there was an irony at play, and it was deeply psychological, because Belichick would give people like Josh McDaniels and Matt Patricia and Eric Mangini and others this incredibly rare opportunity. He would hire them when they were very young and just bury them in football stuff. And so they got this like unbelievable football education. And yet when they were on their own, they not only struggled to put all of the pieces together, but they mimicked him. Josh McDaniels would wear a gray hoodie at practice, and Eric Mangini's press conferences, he resembled Belichick. And it was something that went beyond wins and losses. It was something that was deeply psychological. And, even though I don't think that Brian Flores and Joe Judge are Belichick clones, everybody's different. But broadly speaking, there's a program that's run in New England that, as it turns out, is just not transferable. It turns out there really is no Patriot way. There's two very special people, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, whose lives intersected at the perfect time. And, that's what made them so special.
Very cool. Yeah, I definitely just wanted to, get your take on that, because I know a lot of people call the NFL today a copycat league, and that's kind of what it's been because of the Patriots, and everyone tries to do it, the Patriot way. But as you say, there's only two guys who could really emulate that to the furthest extent. Just going into another coach that was under Bill Belichick for a while, former Texans head coach Bill O'Brien. 2 years ago, when I was doing my radio show, I talked about Bill O'Brien a lot, just because of the specific things that he was doing. I was not a fan in any way. I do agree that he has been a good coach within different aspects. He was at Penn State for a while, won there. He went to the Texans, was 9-7, 10-6 every year, did make a wild card game. I think won one or two wild card games in his time there, but never obviously made it any farther than that. Then he was promoted to the GM, which kind of confused me pretty greatly. And then in your book, I believe you say that he tried to get fired by the Texans in the hope that he could succeed Bill Belichick. Can you just walk me through that whole situation?
Yeah. So that situation was interesting. And obviously, I think with Bill O'Brien, if you consider him part of the Belichick tree, he's the most successful from that tree. And it's really not even close. I mean, he's had some playoff success, and even though he was fired by the Texans eventually, he just had greater success than many of these other guys. But, 2017 season, as we've discussed, there was just a lot of problems in the building, and the Krafts were wondering whether Belichick was going to be there long term. And at the meantime, Billy O was in his own power struggle down in Texas, and it seemed like that he was trying to, it was coming to a head. And it turned out that, at one point, Brady was so frustrated with Belichick that he met with Kraft about it. And, they were both kind of fantasizing, like, what if Belichick were to retire? Who could be someone to succeed him? And they both thought that Billy O'Brien, might be more open to, working with Brady on personnel or bigger issues, giving Brady more influence than Belichick was. And word reached Billy O, who, of course, was really, it looked like things were touch and go there for a while with him and management in Houston. He ended up winning that power struggle. And he later joked that it was kind of an empty victory, because he later joked to a confidant. He was like, look, I was trying to get fired.
Really? Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting, I always thought that was interesting when I saw it. It was kind of, doing some research on the book, because I had never heard that before. And you were obviously the first person to say, I don't want to hold you for too long. I just have one more question, not even about the book. I just want to ask you, are you working on any, new hot NFL stories, or are you kind of taking a break doing this whole book tour?
No, I'm working on them. I can't disclose them right now, but, we've talked a lot about the book, but, the book is a byproduct of the work that I've done at ESPN and, doing investigative stories and feature stories. I mean, it wouldn't have happened if ESPN hadn't given me the opportunities that they did. And so, I'm very grateful for that, and that's my job. And, I really enjoy it. I'm passionate about that, as much as ever.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. And, really cool stuff you're doing, Seth. I really appreciate you coming on. It means a lot to me. I just want to thank you on that. And, hope you do well with the book. You're coming to UConn on Thursday, I believe, right?
Correct.
But this has been, a fantastic interview. I've learned a lot from it. And it was just great to be able to pick your brain a little bit about, the league and the sport that I love.
Thanks, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Seth.